All right. Welcome everyone to our final event in the 2025 Community and Youth Organizing Series at CUNY SPS Youth Studies. I was just reflecting with Professor Bandele. I can't believe it's coming to a close. So thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you for those of you who joined last week. We watched Following Harry, which was about the beautiful intergenerational activist partnerships that Harry Belafonte nourished in the last decade of his life. And, including one with our esteemed professor and curator of this series, Professor Lumumba Bandele. But today, for our last session, it is not a film. We get to be inspired and activated by the powerful youth organizing that's happening here in New York City around issues of economic justice. And before we jump into it, I just want to give a little bit of context for why we're honing in on economic justice tonight and, kind of why these particular groups have been chosen. So part of why we're talking about economic justice in New York City, I think, is, because it's increasingly an unaffordable place for people to grow up. And, we have the horrifying statistics of we have 110 billionaires, while 25% of children are growing up in poverty. So there's that, right? But I think, tonight we'll really be looking at what life is like for 18 to 24-year-olds in this city who are finding it increasingly hard to start out a life here if one doesn't come from privilege. So you think about median rent for a studio is over $3,000 now, right? College has gotten more expensive, food is more expensive, and even paying for Metro cards can feel like a lot. So these are three of many youth organizing efforts across our city that are trying to address material conditions for young people in New York City. And we chose these three because, all of this work is intergenerational, but youth-led. All these groups are using kind of a critical and participatory research lens and research that's guiding their work. They're pushing to create policies or change policies in New York City. And, a lot of this work is housed or supported in some way by CUNY. So that's kind of why we came to these wonderful groups. And, I'm sorry, I do want to say that tonight I have another event for youth studies, so I won't be able to be involved in the collective learning that I love in this series, but I want to say that I've learned a bunch over the year from two of the panelists, Abubi and Emmanuel, because I too am part of the NYC Youth Agenda Coalition. So I know from personal experience that it's going to be a wonderful night of sharing with NYC Youth Agenda, Youth Empower, and NYC Union of Students. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Professor Bandele, and we will get started.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate you all. Thank you for joining us and joining us for our last event of our three-part series. It's been an exciting series and closing out what I think is probably the most important of the series, which is us actually being in conversation and getting not only inspiration, but also direction from young people and being able to leave this particular session with some charges, some assignments, and some clarity about what our role should be. So before we begin, let's just do some basic things. Those of you who've been on this already know that we are going to have the panel discussion, and then we are going to open this up to questions from you all in the audience, and we're going to ask that you begin to actually just start writing down some of your questions so that when it's time, you can just throw them in the chat and we can move forward. So we are going to ask you to utilize the question and answer box or the chat to put your questions in. So we won't be bringing people on screen, but we're going to ask you to write your questions down. Also, if you experience any technical issues, please let us know via the chat so that we can troubleshoot. Yeah, and we have our language justice folks here. So, please, I'm very appreciative of them. And so we are trying to be as inclusive as possible. So Let's get this moving. We have an amazing panel this evening. Um, we're going to be in conversation highlighting three youth-led organizing efforts in New York City that are advocating for greater economic justice as this city becomes, as Sarah said, increasingly more unaffordable for young adults. Members of the New York City Youth Agenda Coalition will be sharing their policy recommendations on housing, transportation, jobs, and food access. We will have representation from the New York City Union of Students who are going to discuss their efforts to secure justice in higher education funding. And then finally, we're going to have young people from Youth in Power. They're going to address the challenges faced by those transitioning out of the child welfare system and their ongoing fight for basic income support in New York State. So let's jump in, and now I want to introduce you to three of our panelists so that we can dive right in. Representing the New York City Union of Students, we have Rachel Parsley. Rachel is a junior at Hunter College, majoring in anthropology and minoring in political science and geography. They are the child of Jamaican immigrants and have seen firsthand how higher education can be a tool to stabilize families and end generational poverty. Rachel has a passion for urban design, specifically in regard to accessible transportation and universal housing. Rachel has been a part of several campaigns and organizations, aiming to create social equity for working class people of all backgrounds. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, so happy to be here. Excited.
Good. Also joining us, representing the New York City Youth Agenda, we have Emmanuel Anand Jr. Emmanuel was born and raised in Brooklyn as a sophomore at BMCC. He is passionate about equity and equality on all fronts and adequate access to healthcare. He is a lead facilitator for Why Vote, a youth-led nonpartisan nonprofit that focuses to engage and empower youth on civic engagement, ranging from national politics to the issues that we see in our everyday lives. He's also co-chair for the Economic Mobility Group for the New York City Youth Agenda, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. And New York City Youth Agenda is a coalition full of various like-minded people from multiple nonprofits, initiatives, and organizations who push for different policies for the betterment of youth in New York City. Welcome, Emmanuel. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone.
Great. And then we have also representing Youth Empower Transforming Care Collective. Please welcome Denise Okana. Denise is a Brooklyn College graduate with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a minor in Anthropology. She is a proud Mexican American who grew up in New York City. Her life experiences led her to have a passion for mental health and social justice advocacy. She currently works as the program coordinator at the Youth Advocacy Corps and as a youth action organizer, researcher with Youth in Power, Transforming Care. Please welcome our three panelists. Thank you all for joining us. And just so you all know, there are a few other guest panelists that we have in the audience, and we're going to be bringing them up to also be a part of these conversations. And so it's going to be almost like a living room conversation, and we're going to encourage you all to participate in this, so please get comfortable, grab some snacks, and let's kick it. Let's really try to figure out where we are, where we're going, and particularly in this moment where so much is at stake. So why don't we start off with Rachel in the New York City Union of Students. First, can you just talk to us about your organization, how and why it was formed?
Yes, of course. So starting off at the end of last spring, a lot of different students on different campuses were really inspired by like the actions that we were seeing across the nation, and we wanted to like continue that momentum into the summer, into the next fall semester, and ensuring that like we wouldn't lose like the motivation and the intensity that we were seeing and passion that students across like different backgrounds are finding. And so a group of us came together and over the summer, we began organizing a 8-week student organizer boot camp, essentially. And that was given a lot of funding through like the repeal egregious property accumulation and invest it right campaign. And we were able to get like funding to host once a week, every Saturday. We could provide lunch for people, Metro cards, so that students from all over the city could come in and really bring in like speakers from like City Hall. Like we had like Zoran Mamdani, we had different union members, whether that be from the CUNY, PSC, excuse me, and then also coming in from other organizations around the city, and also have the opportunity for us to really grow our skills as future student organizers, and also begin to teach some of the history that comes into both private and public institutions, and how they have gone from being extremely well funded to now much more like crumbling. CUNY is a term that we see a lot, and also like that juxtaposition with like private institutions that are just expanding and like gobbling up more and more space and land across the city, and then none of that value is then being returned to the city that they are a part of.
Thank you. Let's actually dive into that because I'm curious to learn more about your work with the repair bill, specifically getting NYU and Columbia University. I love that they're being called out specifically to provide financial resources to CUNY, but also New York City at large. Can you talk to us about what that actually looks like and how did you get to that place of this being a campaign? You also have some data in there that I'm extremely impressed with in terms of your ability to couch it and frame it in terms of the institutions, NYU and Columbia, in terms of what they actually pay in taxes to the city and considering the amount of real estate that they own.
Yes, it's actually kind of insane to if you really put it into perspective, but Columbia and NYU are two of the two private institutions that are the second and first largest private property owner in all of New York City. And that has been able to happen due to the fact that they are exempt from property taxes, and combined, both institutions are not paying up to $320 million of property taxes. And that allows them to outbid other companies and things and push out native residents in Morningside Heights, push out people in the Lower East Side, and buy more property to increase their control and campus size. This has been going on for decades, like back in the 80s, 70s, like you saw it happening, and now it's just like increasing and increasing. And in just like this year alone, NYU has launched like an entire new building project to open up like a $6 million building in the middle of Lower East Side that's like going to be pushing out Lower East Side residents, raising the rent. But in all of these things are private and not accessible at all to the city. And so while they're able to buy it like for cheap and like basically like take it away and gentrify these areas, they're not in turn having like any impacts that are going to be like making that same distinct impact back.
Mm. And just to be clear, this is not just Manhattan, right?
No.
So these institutions own property outside of Manhattan in other boroughs. I know NYU has property in downtown Brooklyn, other places. So this actually impacts more than just Manhattan. I think oftentimes people assume that you're just talking about, Manhattan. So if you're in Brooklyn, you have no actual, reason to care about this. Talk about this in terms of the juxtaposition to CUNY's struggling financial reality.
Yeah, so for a little bit of context and history, CUNY was free for the first 175 years that it was established.
Can you just repeat that? Because I think that so many of us are so used to having these conversations and these demands around pausing tuition hikes, right? So it was free. Please repeat that.
Completely 100% free to attend CUNY institutions. We were known as like the free university. It was a tool for people to really experience social mobility because they'd be able to get that college degree and like still have their job, still pay their rent, and they wouldn't have to worry about things or paying tuition on top of that. But right around when free admission started and a lot of Black and Brown New Yorkers were finally able to get admission into these universities at the same rate as their white counterparts, that is when the 1975 New York City financial crisis hit. And all of a sudden, one of the first industries to experience gutting was our public education. And that's when we started imposing tuition. And since then, it's just been rising and rising throughout the decades.
Mhm. Thank you. I want to just loop in also another one of your colleagues who's been working in this campaign with you, Sebastian Leon Martinez. If you can, let us know. First of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us in this conversation. Talk to us about your particular role in this campaign and what are some of the significant challenges you all have, particularly with this repair bill that you all are moving.
Yeah, of course. And so, just for a quick introduction, real quick, obviously my name is Sebastián León Martínez. I grew up in New York. I grew up in the South Bronx and East Harlem. Um, and, I think one of the main challenges for me, I go to NYU. I'm currently an undergraduate student, is I guess kind of that mobilization of, I guess, private school students, right? Especially like, working with some of my like co-organizers at Columbia too, we find it that there's two main problems, I guess, when it comes to trying to have some organizing like this on campus. The first one is just apathy, right? A lot of people, I think it's 83% of NYU students are not from New York. And the ones that are commuters or transfer students actually from CUNY, who don't live on campus, who don't really engage too much with student life. And so I guess combating the apathy, making sure that we have, I guess, like some kind of engagement and trying to almost convince people that um, I guess New Yorkers, right, or people who are attending CUNY or um, the tenants affected by NYU and Columbia's expansions um, deserve to have like better standards of living, standards of education, standards of care, right? Um, and I guess the second one is a bit harder, which is like how can we as like students who are in like more, I guess, privileged situations, right? Even though like, my mom and my sister went to CUNY, like I got a scholarship and I went to a private university, right? But ensuring that we are able to, I guess, center the narratives of CUNY students, and especially making sure that we're able to, I guess, support CUNY students in any way we can, whether it's like through our capacity. Because, for example, a lot of my co-organizers at NYU don't have to work full-time jobs and are able to offer up more time and energy, is probably very invaluable when it comes to like making sure that we're actually supporting and propping up CUNY students who tend to be from, I guess, less privileged backgrounds. And I guess this all just culminates into making sure that, the roadblocks that we face are hopefully temporary. Already we've seen a lot of engagement, especially, at least from my end, right, at NYU, from a lot of the native New Yorkers who want to like help out and want to make sure that, despite going to NYU, they can help out, the people they went to high school with or their family members or stuff like that. And that excitement, I guess, is very important for a lot of students. And we try to like, hitch on those narratives a lot, especially when we're here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. CUNY has, and let me just say I'm CUNY alum also, not only CUNY faculty, and I actually choose to do that because CUNY is just one of the rare experiences of being in literally just that a community university environment. I always like to say when I first started teaching at Medgar Evers College, it was, not out of the ordinary for me to be doing my laundry over the weekend and seeing my students, right? So there's a sense of not just community, but accountability that's built in to being in the CUNY community. Also, CUNY has a very rich and long history of student activism. Do you all have you all been able to make some of those connections with previous student movements, student organizations, and been able to pinpoint where this particular campaign fits in the trajectory of student organizing that has been happening over the generations at CUNY?
I can answer that. So yes, as I mentioned before, like we have the opportunity to bring in a number of like guest speakers and things like that. And a few different unions have formed throughout the years, and like different campaigns have existed on CUNY campuses. And we've had the privilege of speaking directly with organizers, a part of Hunter College Student Union, who were organizing for childcare on campus. We've had the pleasure of meeting with students who were occupying or hearing from students who were part of occupations of City College back in the 60s and 70s to ensure like free admissions. And one of like the big pillars of like what we are trying to do is ensuring that students are educated in CUNY's history and ensuring that like we're bringing those same principles into our work now, so that when we are rallying and text banking and knocking on dorms and stuff like that, that we're ensuring that all students understand that this isn't like a fight that to get Columbia and NYU to pay their taxes is not like an unwinnable battle. It's something that we've seen successes done before, and we are ensuring that like we are taking those same like skills and lessons into our practices now.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you all. For the audience, I'm going to ask you to please just put your questions in the chat. We're going to bring Sebastian and Rachel back for a broader Q&A, but I want to move now to a conversation with New York City Youth Agenda. So I'm going to pivot right now to Emmanuel Anand Jr. Let me see if I can find you so I can pin you as well. Here you go. Okay. Good to see you. Let's just first of all talk about this framework of economic mobility. Reading some of your stuff on the website, and it's quite fascinating. So talk to me about Youth Agenda's framework of this idea of economic mobility, particularly as it pertains to young people.
Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Emmanuel again. And economic mobility has always been one of our focus groups for the NYC Youth Agenda. I don't know if a lot of you think about economic mobility or even use the term for a lot of things that we see and experience in our daily lives. So as Sarah was mentioning in her intro, New York City is becoming increasingly unaffordable. Such examples are like food and the MetroCard prices steadily raising up. Some people now have congestion pricing taxes as an added expense. And this hurts a lot, especially harder for a younger person if you don't come from an affluent background. And the current median rent is $3,400. Um, that is a lot. Food costs a lot, commuting is a lot. And so it's hard for young people to imagine building a life here with all of these looming large dollar signs on every bill and expense that they have to think about. And so economic mobility was formed because we had this Youth Ask Youth census where we would ask young people, like, do you see yourselves being able to live in New York City, even if you wanted to? And what are some of the challenges that come? Um, so we use this data to kind of shape our recommendations for economic mobility and our group. And it has been in our top 5 group for the past 5 years. And we have seen movement relating to SYP, but we are still working on getting equitable housing for young people.
Mhm. Can you talk a little bit about how, because oftentimes when we engage in conversations around particularly young people and this idea of economic growth, sustainability, oftentimes we are presented with things that are insufficient, low wage, unsustainable jobs, housing that clearly is not quality housing, right? What kind of shifts in your narrative are you making in terms of your language that you're saying what economic mobility actually should include and how it is not what it has been presented to us in the past?
I think that's actually a fair question. And that kind of relates to what we're doing now. We're kind of looking at the language. So in the past, we have made policy recommendations. We have looked at how things have been successful. But as you've been mentioning, like when elected officials and politicians are like, hey, we did what you asked, we're like, that's not exactly what we asked or how we asked for it to be implemented. So we're constantly thinking of ways to make sure that we're more specific and clear about everything that we're saying. We're being more intent with what we're saying. But as we have moved away from our shift for policy recommendations, we actually are creating like this bill that is going up to the state. And so A lot of it is making sure that everything is correct in the way that we're wording and framing things, making sure that everything's clear from where is this money coming from? How does it have to be implemented? I think, yeah, that's.
Mhm. Thank you. I got one more question that I'm actually want to see if we can bring in Ebube to help us in this as well. But you all have some very specific recommendations that I think are quite doable, right? You're talking about expanding MetroCard use, right? A few other like very basic things. What are some of those low-hanging fruit things that you are recommending that New York City implement?
So I can go first and then pass it off to Abube. But a lot of this, and I think that technically answers your last question, is that we're using this bill and modeling and parodying it based off of things that are already implemented for senior citizens. And so, like senior citizens have housing set aside, we want to see housing set aside for young people, aged 18 to 24, where there is more affordable housing that, as we know, there is when a building is being bought up and there is affordable housing, they'll take anywhere from 10 to 15%. There is X amount of apartments set aside for young seniors, well, senior citizens. And so we want to do the same for young people. That also means that we could use transitional and dorm style housing options to help make sure that there is a tight-knit community. We love to see that at CUNY, and I think that could go great elsewhere. We also, and I think this is kind of my favorite one, is extend the MetroCard and Omni benefits to 18 to 24-year-old, because we know that outside of if you can't really, Fair Fares, there is a program called Fair Fares. A lot of people may not know about it, but in addition, a lot of people may not, be eligible for it because of that it goes by the national poverty guidelines and not, New York City poverty guidelines. So we do want to say, like, just like senior citizens, for the most part, they just have to prove that they're of a certain age to receive a MetroCard. That, hey, we want to make sure that young people just have to use their age, show proof that they are 18 to 24 or younger, and they can get the same MetroCard benefits, such as half-price MetroCards that are applicable in many forms of transportation that they want to use. And I will pass it off to Abube. So yeah.
Thank you. Welcome, Ebube.
Hi, Lumumba. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Emmanuel, for speaking so wonderfully about some of our recommendations so far. So just to pick up from where Emmanuel stopped, these are all recommendations that we have to promote like the economic mobility and just the economic health of young people in New York City in general. Emmanuel touched on the Metro cards and Omni card benefits, but we also pushing for like youth specific provisions when it comes to SNAP. Like some of us know the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP. So we're pushing for benefits in that area as well. But also tax benefits and credits for young workers. Increasing tax benefits aimed at supporting young people who are like in the early stages of their careers. Emmanuel touched upon how the median rate for rent in New York City right now is $3,400. It's pretty difficult to expect a young person, ages 18 to 24, who just graduated college or who's still in college to be able to afford that. And some landlords are looking for rent or a proof of income that's going into, and we just graduated college. Some of us might not necessarily be able to afford that right now, but being able to keep that set aside in mind to promote affordability and promote, opportunities for young people to actually make sure they're set in communities and at that early stage of their careers. And finally, just even age specific benefits. Emmanuel touched upon this briefly, like the way they're like benefits for senior citizens, using that same lens to look at young people ages 18 to 24 when it comes to SNAP benefits, when it comes to housing benefits and reduction in cost. And, senior citizens have, things like AARP, but having that kind of program for young people who provide, substitute gym memberships, substituted museum tickets on specific days or things like that would definitely help out the economic well-being of young people in general, focus, ages 18 to 24. But then even like we've also pushed things like when it comes to SYP, it might touch upon this, but economic mobility has been a real core and issue area that we've had throughout the 5 years that we've worked on the youth agenda. The very first year, economic mobility was here, and then just year after year, young people kept on suggesting that, hey, we need to keep on pushing things for economic mobility. I mean, we've come a long way. When we started 5 years ago, SYP was hiring about 70,000 young people in New York City. And then this past year, that we broke that 100,000 thousand individual hiring mark, where SYP and DYCD hired over 103,000 young people to have jobs in New York City. So but then even for young people, like it's still not enough. We're still pushing for it. And like, when we put out the Yay census, about 55% of young people still believe that, summer jobs will help them feel more financially secure. So being able to look at these things and providing an opportunity where every young person who wants a job can get a job would definitely help economic mobility for young people to a tremendous extent.
It's fascinating. A few years ago, we had a panel for this series where we talked about reimagining community safety. One of the components that was lifted up was this idea of economic stability and fighting against poverty. Can you talk a little bit about the connection in terms of framing how you all see economic mobility as an essential part of reimagining what our communities, being a healthy, holistically healthy community, can look like?
I mean, well, you might go for it.
Okay. Well, I'll pass it off to you. But I think just overall at least a healthy and stable neighborhood or community. A lot of the issues that we see, crime, robbery, thievery, food insecurity, a lot of these issues disproportionately affect Black and Brown and people of color in New York City. So by ensuring that, and especially I can say this from experience, like I have to help my family, and it is hard getting a job and working in the job market. And so being able to have these tools to make sure that you feel secure enough helps young people feel that they have a future, but it also leads to less headlines in the news, especially from the New York Post, like, New York City crime is up by 12,000%, and crazy headlines such as that. And I think that can greatly contribute to the stability of our community, but I think I'll pass it off to Uwe.
No, Emmanuel, I think you covered it. Like when Lumumba asked that question, my mind immediately went to like crime rates and things like that. I think if we look at the number one reason why people commit crime is mostly because they don't have access to those things. They don't have the resources. They don't have funding, access to healthy foods, and that makes people commit crimes. But when we provide that opportunity, especially for young people, where they could become economically stable at such a early career age or at such a early point at career starting, like it's able to reduce crime rates in society and also make society very stable for young people in general and people in general.
Exactly. And within the context of all of this happening in one of the wealthiest cities on this globe, where the disparity of the wealthy versus the working class continues to grow. So I really appreciate the work that you all are doing in holding the city to task. We're going to come back to you all. I want to actually now pivot to Ms. Denise Okana. I'm going to ask you to join us here, and we're going to move other folks out. 1 second. Here we go. Hey there.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. I truly appreciate you, and I'm, really appreciate learning about the work that you all are doing. So let's jump in, because I think we're seeing some threads here, with the conversations that are already happening, in terms of looking at not just the disparities of economic challenges and people who actually have the ability to be mobile, economically struggling folks, but there are also different experiences that young people have that add another layer to some of these challenges. So you all have been conducting some participatory research project with youth transitioning out of foster care, and you've been doing that with other researchers, right?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that process. Number one, I'm actually a fan of participatory research. For those who don't know, can you share what that is? And then talk about what you have been uncovering.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm here with LaTroya, and she may be sharing some slides that we made, just to provide you all like a brief introduction as to who we are and what exactly our collective does. So this is Youth Empower. This is the team. We took a long time to land this on this name, so we are Youth Empower Transforming Care. Next slide, please. So our project is actually a partnership between the Children's Defense Fund of New York and the Public Science Project at the CUNY Graduate Center, along with the Center for the Study of Social Policy and New Yorkers for Children. So we are a collective with young people aged 18 to 25 with lived expertise in the child welfare system, along with some researchers, some policy advocates, and organizers. And for the past 2 years, what we have been doing is exploring, documenting, and uplifting the needs, desires, and the vision that young people who are transitioning out of foster care as young adults living in New York City, one of the wealthiest cities in the country, but also one of the most expensive to live in, what they actually see for themselves and what they actually want in their lives. So what our work does, next slide, please, is we actually had a pilot. So we had a 1-year pilot where we held a direct cash transfer, and this started in June 2023, and it was open to youth who aged out of the foster care system here in New York City. And these participants were between the ages, most of them were between the ages of 18 to 22, and they were able to receive $1,000 a month with no strings attached. And these youth had to be out of foster care for a minimum of 6 months. If you guys didn't know, I believe the estimate is that 500 youth actually age out of the foster care system a year. So we were able to have 100 in our pilot, and all of these participants were able to decide if they like to be a participant in our research. So it wasn't an obligation to be a part of the research in order to be a part of the pilot and receive the money. It was completely up to them. And luckily, most of them did consent to be a part of the research. And what that basically looked like, it was participatory action research, as you had shared. And what that basically is this kind of statement that we've carried with us throughout the pilot, which is nothing about us without us. So all of our research comes from their experience. They fill out surveys, they are part of focus groups, and they share their stories, they share their experience, they share how this money has impacted them, and we go over the results with them. They were able to come to this event that we had where we had like a data blitz. We essentially went over all the research with them, and we went through what we saw as like highlights of it, and they were able to, provide feedback. They were able to analyze this, be in conversation with us. And that's kind of what participatory action research looks like. And yeah, I don't know, LaTroy, if you want to highlight anything else about PAR work.
I want to see if I can
Yeah.
pin LaTroya, but I don't think I can while the screen is being shared.
Oh, it doesn't need to be shared anymore. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Let's bring LaTroya in here. And while we're doing that, just can you share with us what is the existing process for young people aging out of foster care? I don't think we know what that is. So we're talking about what changes need to happen. What does that look like right now?
So right now, the process looks different for all young people that are aging out of foster care. Everyone has a different story depending on what agency they're at, or if they're in a kinship home, or if the various ranges of transitional experiences. But there are some guarantees that are supposed to be in place for young people when they're aging out. Like young people who age out of care are guaranteed housing. They are supposed to get some form of one-time stipend, clothing allowance, furniture support for that move, and a bunch of other services. But not all young people receive all of these services or have equal access to getting them. So the the range of experience of youth who are transitioning out of care looks vastly different. This pilot was very innovative in that it's not anywhere near the norm of what is available to youth who are leaving as far as like financial monetary value. And to circle back a little bit, to just add a little bit of commentary about what participatory action research is. So critical participatory action research is really centered around the lived experiences, like Denise mentioned, of people who are experiencing whatever issue is being studied. So PAR, which we like to call it in short, is a research epistemology, and where the framework is around engaging research with communities who are interested in documenting, challenging, and transforming conditions of social justice, but while including people who have experienced some of these social injustices. So PAR research teams really look very different, but it consists of academics, people who are at the center of the issue, policy advocates, and other ranges of folks across time. So that's a little bit about PAR, and it is centered around a model of no research around about us without us. So in PAR projects, we, for this one in particular, we had young people who have experienced transitioning out of care participate in the research design, the survey creation. They went through the data with us at every chance that we got when we did have the data. There was experiences and opportunities for them to analyze that data with us, and even they are even a part of the share back process, the next steps, and what the action would look like out of the research, which is usually not really a thing within research. Research usually centers, is usually done on these communities, not with these communities. And the people who get credit for these research are really far removed from the research. So you have people, academics, who are not really a part of what they are studying, but they are going to get credit. They're going to do their dissertation. They're going to go off into these like fields. They get back something, and the communities they study don't usually get back anything. So PAR is a research model that goes against that.
I appreciate that. In my class, we talk about the necessary principle of self-determination in organizing, and this is actually an example of that. So thank you for doing it. I have a bunch of questions, but let me just get off two really quickly. First, LaTroy, can you talk about what your role is in all of this? I didn't have an opportunity to truly introduce you the way I did some of the other panelists, but please share what your particular role is in this campaign, this project, rather.
So I'm a co-researcher on Youth Empower. I'm also an adult ally within the Youth Agenda Steering Committee. I have my hands in the pot of a lot of participatory action research things because I also am a true lover of PAR research. But within the Youth Empower Collective, I'm a adult co-researcher. Within PAR, we center our framework also around removing hierarchies and titles. So I'm a researcher the same as the young people are in the group.
Thank you. And what do you expect to do with the research out of this? I imagine there are a number of things that will be, come out of this, the possible, policy recommendations, adjustments to existing practices in some of these systems. What are your hopes for this pilot? What do you want to see happen, best case scenario?
Pass it to Denise.
Yeah. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on like the hierarchy thing. I sometimes tend to get confused as to like what to refer, like LaTroy and the other people on the team. But we're all kind of like basically just colleagues, it seems like. But yeah, as for the question, what we're hoping to do and what we're looking to get to, we most recently have been working with some of the participants on some of the participants in our research on kind of turning our pilot into policy. So what that basically means is that we have been in conversation with each other as to how to go about advocating, how to go about having conversations with policymakers, people up in Albany, people in power, more specifically, Senator Jamari Brisport had a bill that we are working on kind of like remodeling and tweaking a bit to turn our pilot into policy so that it's not just youth who have to wait around to see if, another pilot like this will come about, but will then turn to instead have to, just kind of uh wait for this to become policy and wait for it to become law so that it can be for everyone. It doesn't have to just be for like, a small group who were lucky to be in the pilot, but can instead be every year for everyone who is transitioning out of foster care. And yeah, that is what we are working on currently. We're also working on analyzing the data, the research, and just releasing a new releasing that to the public so that everyone can kind of just learn more.
Mhm. Can you also just speak to the skills that are developed by the young people participating in this? This is, people go to college to learn this, right? They're literal, people who pay big money to learn this. Talk about what this does to young people in terms of them actually having this skill set under their belt now.
Right. So for someone who, like me, like a youth, who is part of Youth Empower Transforming Care, and works with LaTroya and other people on our team, I personally have learned a lot about data, research, advocacy, public speaking, that kind of thing, and have most recently like used those skills to be applying to PhD programs and stuff like that. This work has inspired me to go down that route. But for others who were participants in our research and have been able to join us and learn more about, the results, what we have seen, what we are now working on, turning this pilot into policy, they have been able to participate with us in like advocacy days, going to Albany, going and speaking to policymakers and just people in power to be able to tell their story and speak on how this work has impacted their lives and how it can impact so many other lives in just beneficial ways. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, just last question. I imagine that the young people are actually cited as co-authors of the research, and so they actually literally will be record of their work in this. Is that correct? That's absolutely wonderful. All right, I'm going to actually bring the other panelists back, and we're going to have some conversations. I want to just have us really look at the cross sections of the different work that you all are doing, and how those particular things, are really transformative. So welcome back, everyone else. I think I have everybody. Did I miss anybody? No. All right, good. Let me ask you a few things before we open it up to the audience. And audience, I'm going to actually amend the process for asking questions. In fact, I'm going to ask you if you can, even if you did already, if you put your question in the chat, I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and put it in the Q&A box, because that will help me. That way I don't have to scroll back through the entire chat. But if it's in the Q&A box, I can just lift it up from there. So if you're ready, put your question in there, perfect. If you put your question in the chat thread, please rewrite it in the Q&A thread. That would be very helpful for me. Thank you. All right, let's talk a little bit about strategy. I'm an organizer. How you do what you do is, it means everything. So I'm curious to know, we can start really, just pick back up with you, Denise. Let's talk about the strategy that you all use for not just research, but outreach. Like, how do you if we're being frank, right? this isn't one of the sexy topics that you usually get young people involved in, right? This is not about police violence. This is not about some of the other stuff that's always on the top of people's radar. This is all something different. So what is your strategy for recruiting people to be engaged not only as researchers, but also, I imagine, to actually engage in other parts of this?
Yeah, so one of the big parts of our work is advocacy and just speaking up and telling stories about, why this is important, how it impacts like just the greater community. And one of the ways that we have been able to kind of recruit our participants into advocating for this and for this to become, um, just a bigger to hit a wider population is just by expressing and importance on putting an putting emphasis on the importance of this. So one thing that we always do is just we make sure to stay in contact with the participants and kind of just keep them in the loop. And in doing so, being that helps us be able to bring them back. And one way that we did that just a few months ago was when we were closing out the pilot, we had a big event and we kind of went over everything that we did in the past year and what we were hoping to do. And we had a large component of that event to be for advocacy. And what we did there was we created kind of like a fact sheet, the myths as on the myths that a lot of people in the public have on, providing money to like providing money with no strings attached to youth. A lot of myths is that, they're just gonna waste it, they're not gonna know how to spend it, they're not gonna save it, they're not gonna want to work anymore. And what we saw in the research was that that wasn't true. And we did kind of like a fact sheet on that, and we converted those fact sheets into actual postcards. And they were able to fill out these postcards and have this stuff sent to people in power, senators, people
Mhm.
in office, that kind of thing. And they really like that. We spent a lot of time on that. And yeah, I feel like a big part of it, just to like answer the question and put a bow on it, is that, just keeping people updated, keeping them in the loop, and just enforcing that what they have experienced is important and that these things should change.
Mhm. Thank you for that. And the same question, I want to kick it to Rachel and Sebastian. You all have a campaign that is, actively engaging campuses, not just CUNY, but also other campuses that are pretty lively right now with organizing initiatives, efforts, everything from the divest stuff out of Palestine, out of Israel, all that stuff is happening on those campuses. Talk to me about your strategy of bringing in additional youth student support to your work.
I can touch on like the CUNY half of things, and then I'll hand it over to Seb to talk about NYU. But one of the major things that we've been doing on campus, especially with students who are not like participating in any activist spaces themselves, is essentially giving the tools and language to students and helping them identify different problems on campus. And like through different training workshops, being able to help them like power map and understand who's responsible for inadequate facilities, lack of funding for different programs, why are things being cut, and like whose paycheck is like getting like a bonus instead of like our like humanities programs getting like revitalized, or why are like CUNY athletics being cut, and like those types of things that are like facing CUNY students across all 25 different institutions. um, and so we're essentially like agitating around these things on campus and helping. A lot of times people think that like whenever they're encountering a problem, they're the only ones experiencing it, and allowing them have like and see the community of other students who are also going through the same hardships, jumping through the same hoops, and all like trying to get a quality education and that we all deserve, and allowing them to like research the gaps in their education and research the gaps in their experiences, and then allow them to come to the solutions themselves of like, oh, just throwing money at something might not be helpful, like what actually, like what are like the steps that are needed to be done, and where does money have to be placed to actually see the change we want to see on campus. And to segue into like NYU and Columbia, we've been doing a lot of things. Like once a month, we meet across campus, like across CUNY campuses, across
Mm.
NYU and Columbia, to ensure that there are relationships being built across campuses, and that the problems that you're having at Hunter, you might be having those at Brooklyn College, and now we all are on the same page. Let's find a solution together, and then vice versa. Of like, this is a problem that we're experiencing at Hunter. Do you have that same problem at NYU? Yes, no, why? Let's figure it out and like come to the conclusion of like what can be done and how can we bring more attention and like educate other people who are apathetic or just aren't really in the know of like that something can be done about these issues.
Thank you. Sebastian, you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like at NYU?
No, yeah, of course. And I think I kind of alluded to this before, right? But I think the approach that we try to have first and foremost is that we, want to engage with students not out of just like frustrations of like their own conditions or the way that like NYU and Columbia might, for lack of a better word, screw them over and not listen to students and like not listen to our campaigns, whether it's like unionization efforts on campus or like divestment campaigns, right? But also as like a method of like empathy and understanding directly how the universities that we are just attending actively hurt and I guess like create negative experiences for whether it's CUNY students, whether it's the gentrified like tenants in like various areas around Manhattan and Brooklyn. And so in doing this, we kind of like try to do like two things. One is, as Rachel actually mentioned, these cross-campus exchanges, right? And I think this very much helps with avoiding at least like it's very known to NYU students, for example, like the NYU bubble, right? Never leaving below like 14th Street, never actually engaging with like the outer boroughs or like going to like places that are considered sites or hubs of like uh, culture and even just activism in New York outside of, I guess, Lower Manhattan. And so making sure that like, in these cross-campus exchanges, the biggest contingents aren't even, individual CUNY schools. They tend to be from NYU because a lot of students are, if anything, like wanting to like learn more about the city, wanting to learn about how their university or how their own livelihoods may not be the best impact on the native New Yorkers and the other students around them. Um, and I guess like seeing that enthusiasm, obviously, and building off of that is very important because we want to make sure that we build like relationships that are impactful and can actually go both ways in our learning experiences for a lot of students who might not even necessarily like understand fully how NYU is affecting the city that they're, for lack of a better word, for a lot of them like guests and visitors in, and will probably transition out of one day. As for the second part, a lot of what we do is a lot of like dorm storming, a lot of like tabling, right? And like having those face-to-face interactions with students, especially when we um, often see that, especially at private universities, a lot of these students are siloed off from, I guess, talking about certain issues that are not directly impacting them, right? And making sure that we have spaces in which we're able to facilitate discussions on how we as students can be complicit in certain actions, how, even if like we are on campaigns around I guess, our own frustrations that we make sure that the way in which we gauge students, whether it's through media, whether it's through like these in-person interactions, teach-ins, et cetera, are always highlighting, I guess, like the obviously intersectional struggles of, I guess, just everybody that's like involved in the campaign, especially as we bring them in, develop them, and try to make them their own like student leaders on campus.
Mhm. And that's not easy. That's a lot going on. Sorry, please go ahead, Rachel.
I also was going to ask that a lot of times that we're meeting students where they are, we might have events that are much more casual at first, like it might be a clothing swap or a food drive, and then from there we go into a more educational lens, and then how like why are we trying to build like these mutual aid events? Why are we trying to build these connections? And then also like being able to point students into the direction of resources that might like in the meantime while we're like campaigning for the large end goal, like those like halfway points of like how can we help you right now in this moment and what are things like that. That's a lot of like the research that we're doing as well.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. I want to kick it to Latroya and Ebube, and I'm going to make some assumptions here, and I know I should never do that, but I want to talk a little bit about this uh, process of working with young people while honoring their agency, their autonomy, being as supportive as possible, and almost moving into the space of facilitator, right? So you aren't doing for them, you aren't, it literally is a different dynamic. Can you both share a little bit about that process for you all? And Abube, I'm assuming because you both of you like you all could be, young people yourself, and I met, yeah. So I'm making some assumptions here, and I'm probably gonna, get in trouble for this, but can you both just share what this process is like? Because, some of us have been young organizers and we've had experiences with adults who, basically want to tell us how we should do stuff, basically want to tell us what our narrative should be, basically want to say, what our framing around these issues should be. But talk about the space that you all give and how you actually help facilitate this organic growth of young people. LaTroy, can we start with you?
Yeah. And it's so nice to think about this question with Abube, because he was one of our young people within the Youth Agenda who grew up with us and is now
Perfect.
our adult ally in other capacities. He does a couple of different things with Youth Agenda. But and then also interesting to think about because that is my starting place. So for me, it is very refreshing and different. I have about 15 years, don't want to age myself, of experience working within different youth serving spaces. And I'm an alumni of CUNY SPS. And while I was there, I took a youth action and agency course, and that's how I found out about Youth Agenda. And just thinking about what are more participatory models to youth engagement and youth work, because it was not feeling good in the spaces that I was previously working in, where adults have this hierarchical role and they are in charge, they are authoritarian within these programs, and youth don't get a chance to add or contribute to the program their own ideas, opinions, thoughts, what they even want to do. Um, and I was working in after school back then, so that's like around soccer. So youth don't have agency to say like what they want for their soccer program. Um, I was pushing up against a lot of that. So with joining the Youth Agenda, Intergenerational Change Initiative, all of the things, like I'm involved in a lot of PAR projects right now, y'all, because it is really exciting work to allow youth that space to blossom into the act. Like we need these young people. Like I'm always saying that Gen Z is like really amazing, and to be in so many spaces where you get to like see them blossom, but also you are the one of the people that are helping to empower them and validate them, and let them know that their opinions, their ideas, their thoughts are important, and it's what's going to shape the next phase of like how our government looks, what our policies look like, what our advocacy efforts look like, what our research looks like, what our organizing looks like. Young people do have the capacity, and they are very well positioned as right now, especially within New York City, to know like what the problems are and to think about and re-envision what solutions could look like moving forward. So at first it was hard. At first it was very hard to unshed. Like a lot of unshedding happens when you start as an adult within these participatory spaces, because you have to unlearn hierarchy systems and all the things to be able to support young people in a way that isn't harmful and is new, because we need new everything. Like, so I think, and I'll pass it over to Abube now.
Oh man, thank you, Latoria. I think this is a very interesting question because Latoria is bringing the adult perspective, and I'm bringing the perspective from like a young person who's been in these programs. I think a big part of like bridging that gap is I personally have been privileged of being in youth councils and groups that really participate youth adult partnerships, right? Youth adult partnerships, and they make it clear like the youth comes before the adult, and then it's a partnership. So like we want to make sure that the voices of the young people are being heard. And I've been in spaces where I felt like my voice hasn't been heard, and like you're a young person, like you shouldn't know more about this topic, but I do know more because I'm the one that's experiencing it. So being able to be in positions where I'm pushing other young people or pushing my peers to be like, hey, we can say this because we're the one that's going through it. We're the ones that's experiencing it. We know where it hurts. Like if I'm paying $5.90 for like a round trip to go visit my friend in the city, and I gotta pay $2.90 like in the metro cars, like I'm the one that has to experience it. So I gotta tell my own story. If I graduated college, which I did, which is why this conversation is so funny. I graduated NYU last year, and I'm also a product from the CUNY system as well. Like having this experience is like I know what it is to find an apartment after college, to go live somewhere, to go live with a family, and things like that. So these experiences really shape my like identity and how I move forward in that lens. But also looking at things truly through a youth adult partnership. And a lot of people like to use that word like, oh, it's a youth adult, but do you actually practice it? So being able to not only say it and term your partnership in that way, but actually live by it and stick by it, and actually give young people a platform to have a voice is definitely important.
Thank you for that. My next question before I turn it over, rather start reading some of the questions in the Q&A chat, and thank you all. I'm asking you to continue to populate your questions, and we're going to get to them in a second. But the question that I have now is for Sebastian, Rachel, Denise, and I want to start with you, Emmanuel. It's no secret that we are in a moment now where not only is this country going through a transformation, but the world is. Talk a little bit about the work that you're doing right now and how you see that connecting to what is happening, particularly around the country, right? And we can talk about New York City, how, New York City is actually going to be highly impacted by a lot of what's happening on the federal level. But what specifically about the work that you are doing do you think you are able to meet some of the needs of what's going to be required to not only survive these next 4 years, but to be able to position us to be in a different space beyond that? No pressure.
Well, that was quite the huge question. I can't say nationally, but one thing that keeps me motivated in thinking is like the impeachments that South Korea has been having in their political system, and how they had a quote unquote reverse January 6th, where instead of rioters coming up to their capital and embassies, and the people actually banded together, and even helped legislators climb on each other, silently protested, ordered food for each other, and cleaned up. And I think to sum it up, it just gives me like a reminder that people will be people, and that we still will be able to look out for each other and create this sense of community based on this shared understanding. And so the work that we're doing I think that's really the motivator for me, especially in a divisive time such as now, where we see, a lot of misogynistic, racist, and other harmful things, actions, words being spread. This is the time that we need more solidarity, and instead people are being more polarized. And so that the work that we're doing right now, I hope is just, it kind of bands people together, and shows people that, hey, you're not struggling. We're all struggling together, but just because we're struggling together doesn't mean we can't do anything about it. And doing this work just reminds me that if we struggle together, we can make change together. And so hopefully this means that similar initiatives come together and gain light and knowledge, and that they can share their stories of when they struggled together but created change together, especially as many things are being disinvested into. Our public transportation, I fear, might not be invested during this administration. A lot of things or rights are being rolled back And so making sure that people maintain that community, stick together, share their stories of struggling together, but also strive and persevere towards making the changes that they want to see or keep is very important to me. I think that's all I have to say for now.
That's it? Because you killed that, right? Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And you know, I'm going to close out with a different framing, built a little bit on that. But Denise, can I go to you and then Rachel? The world is changing, and a lot of what you're doing, I see, has some impact. Can you talk a little bit about what you see, some of what you're doing, and how that meets this moment?
Yeah, the question is definitely a loaded one, and I kind of like started thinking about how I'm gonna answer, and full transparency, I was like, what do I want to say first? Like what do I want to hit on first? But I feel like similar to what like Emmanuel was saying, I feel like the most important thing right now is to not lose sight in that, you know, we are not alone in this struggle, in this like transformation, as you had said. A lot of the change that's happening right now is going to impact us in so many different ways, but I feel like it's important to keep our mind on the fact that, you know, this is one of the most important times to do this work and to really act on it and to take advantage of everything that everyone is really feeling and experiencing, and just reminding everyone that our work is here, our work is important, what we're doing is important. All of our communities are going to be one of the most impacted ones in so many different ways. And, you know, just continuing to advocate, continuing to, you know, do the research that we are doing, and just providing the proof that like, hey, in terms of like youth and power, providing the proof that, you know, guaranteed income, $1,000 a month with no strings attached, or more than $1,000 a month with no strings attached, because $1,000 a month isn't a lot of money when you're trying to survive in New York City. This all of this works in benefiting the lives of those who need it, like youth transitioning out of foster care, or youth trying to survive in New York City and go to school and provide for their families, et cetera, et cetera. All of this work is important, and it's important to keep advocating for it. It's important to keep doing this work and just going to lawmakers, going to policymakers, and just placing emphasis on this and saying like, hey, you said you would do this, you said you would help this community, you said you would help us, so here's what we found, and here's how it can work and it can be done. And yeah.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Rachel, and then I want to move to you, Sebastian.
Yes. So across the country, higher education is under attack, specifically like the humanities, like critical race theory, anything that's really like targeting and helping and invested in like the lives of marginalized communities has really seen a lot of pushback and blatant like disrespect like across the board. And I think within New York City, New York State, we kind of live in a bubble where like none of this can affect us, but like stuff is starting to roll back, or like we are seeing programs that are like lacking funding like across the board because they're not as profitable, or they're deemed unprofitable by like bigger corporations or investors or admin. And so like they can like very easily like brush it under the rug of like, oh, we're not going to be for example at Hunter, we had there are 5 honors programs for our freshmen that provide like financial assistance and aid and things like that. And one of them was targeted towards like the humanities, like the English, social sciences, things like that. And with very little notice, Hunter decided that they were going to be closing this program. And there was immediate like outrage and pushback. But what really was struggling for, well, a lot of students struggled with, excuse me, was the fact that there was little to no notice. Like we were not aware of the fact that this program was going to be leaving until the semester, like May of spring semester, and it would be gone by the fall. And that's like I think the largest like issue is that like we're out of the loop about what's going on with like our resources. And higher education provides social mobility like economically, but also like consciously within like our own intellectual abilities, like having the opportunity to take classes in women and gender studies, engineering, computer science, African American studies, all of these courses all at once is something that like is really can only be experienced within like a university or graduate level higher education. And with all of these like attacks against higher education, we're seeing like a decline of like and a lot of a decline in appreciation for these degrees, and also like a rise of like anti-intellectualism where people are because they are seeing that they're going to debt for thousands of dollars into these institutions, and then when they graduate their degrees not helping them get jobs and things like that. Like it's a combination of really real world consequences and like realities, but then also a combination of like it's very intentional that we're not focusing anymore in African American studies or women and gender studies, so that we're like shifting away, and that we're not going to be able to call out injustices that we're seeing because we're not going to have the education and the tools that we need to identify these injustices. And so we really in our work we're trying to set a precedent. Like it's happened across the board, like different universities have been able to like establish like pilot programs and like ensuring like Ivy League institutions that are like living on a hill compared to the rest of their community are able to give back. We want to set that same precedent in New York, so that eventually when these these rollbacks happen, because they will happen, we've already set a precedent and like things are like cemented in stone in our constitution on the state level, and then eventually like hopefully national, like that we can ensure that higher education and like this freedom to really like immerse yourself in like a whole diverse pool of subjects is not taken away from future generations, and can continue to be a tool for students and working class Americans, New Yorkers, to uplift themselves and their families and their communities.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate that. Sebastian.
Yeah, no, I mean, Rachel touched a lot of the points I was actually thinking of. But one of the main things is, just like financial aid, right? Especially coming into a new administration that has said that, there aren't, I guess, going to put an emphasis on like, loans and financial aid in general for like higher education and stuff like that. A lot of CUNY students and even a lot of NYU and Columbia students rely on this, right? Especially those from the most marginalized backgrounds. Um, but I mean, like one of the main things I will say is like it's kind of a joke on our campus, but like the president's son goes to our school, right? And there's a lot of, especially lately, I guess like increased worry or fear of like especially repression of like organizing on our campuses. And like even today we were doing some flyering and like people were being aggressive with us, right? And so one of the challenges that we're especially facing isn't even necessarily like at the academic or department level, but it's like when we're actually trying to be out here trying to organize students. We just have to be very mindful of the pushback and the I guess repression that we might face, even as the rhetoric that I pushed out, like more privileged students, right? And making sure that like we stand with each other, students, whether it's like the many undocumented students that are in like the CUNY system and even the private system, um, and making sure that like we continue doing this education that we'd mentioned before, and continue building empathy and stuff like that, because it's going to be especially I'm already seeing it going to be a tougher few years organizing even just on campuses.
Mhm, mhm. Thank you so much for that. And part of one of the reasons I asked that question is because I really believe that particularly young people are going to be the ones that are going to get us through this period that we're in. And the fact that you all are doing the work to really challenge what we are seeing as this facade of democracy falling, right? We are seeing, this structure for what it is, which is an oligarchy, right? We're seeing this war on poor people, this war on working class people, literally for what it is. And the work that you all are doing is going to be picking away at that war. It's going to be picking away at the attacks on us and creating shields to defend us from some of those things. So I wanted to just, again, first say thank you for the work that you're all doing and say how inspired I am. So I'm going to move to some of the questions that are in the chat. The first question is, how do you engage individuals to join your organizational efforts to take action? Do you collaborate with schools other than CUNY, Columbia, and NYU? I guess that's for you, Rachel and Sebastian.
Yeah, so I'll first start off the bat. The repair bill does in its language specifically target NYU and Columbia, but that is only like the beginning. It's not necessarily like our our focus. We do have students who come to our meetings and are a part of our like organizing committee from the New School, from Fordham, other private institutions in the city. But due to the language of repair targeting NYU and Columbia, we do have some focus there. But there is like precedent across the country, like with what we're trying to get essentially for NYU and Columbia to be paying their property taxes directly back into the CUNY institutions. That has happened across the board. It's happened in Connecticut with Yale, New Jersey with Princeton, Harvard, UCLA. All these different institutions have at some point or another, or currently are giving back to their communities explicitly through monetary financial means. One thing that we're now trying to do within our NYC Union of Students is we have 5 demands that are explicitly what happens when we do get that money, where is that going to go? Essentially, it's focusing on transparency, so we know exactly like how much money is being spent in whichever department. It's direct democracy, so that the students have the ability to like basically speak up, vote on, be a part of the conversation when it's when it comes to deciding like, oh, do we want to be funding this program, this department, or like where do we really need to have some like uplifting of funding? It's access. We really want to ensure that all New York City students have access to these amazing facilities. Hunter, we just lost a building to the city. We are giving up our most affordable dorming option in order to build like a brand new like science facility that's going to be open to all university students, CUNY and private institutions as well. So it's like interesting that like it's very easy for like public institutions to have like their doors opened for everyone, but it's not the same vice versa. Like I can't just like scroll onto NYU's campus and use their library. And like having that opportunity for students to like really make the most of their experience and like have like those open door policies. And then labor. We are a student-led organization, but we want to be able to support all of our students, our faculty, and our staff. So like supporting our labor unions, our professors unions, and ensuring that they have the tuitions that they, sorry, not the tuitions, the payrolls that they need, that they're getting the bonuses that they need, and that right now the CUNY union is out 2 years without a contract. That does not make any kind of sense. Like, and we want to ensure that like they are also seeing these same benefits. And then finally, like the repair bill itself, ensuring that this is like a continuous ongoing thing, so that it's not just a one and done, like a drop in the bucket, and like Columbia could write it off as like a tax break or something like that, to ensure that like they're continuously giving back to the New York City community. Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you for that. There's another question here about the participatory action research. How is it funded?
I'm gonna assume that's about Youth Empower.
Yes.
So Youth Empower was funded through a private grant funding, which is why we are pushing this work to move from like a pilot, because it's like, okay, great, grant money's over, we gave it all away. Now what about the rest of the young people transitioning out of care, right? So this can't be an initiative that's funded by private dollars. It has to be like an implemented into city state policy. Yeah, so sorry, I don't have a better answer, but it was privately funded.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. There's a question here from Sabrina, and actually this would have been a good question for Sarah, Dr. Silla Bergman, if she was on. How can current students pitch in or join a research project? And let me just say, maybe you're talking about current CUNY students, let's say, for that sake of this question. Please.
Ask your professor. That's literally how I got into all of these projects. I emailed Sarah or or whoever the professor was for Youth Action Agency. It was Andrea. It was like, hey, I really love the work that you're doing. How can I get involved? That's how I got in. And continually, like, and I think CUNY does provide that space. If you do want to be a part of that work, we let you in. And there are different ways and different projects and different things. So I would like to talk to your professors.
Thank you. And the next question is for you again. Thank you, Tamir, for this question. How do you see participants in PAR go into education? How often, excuse me, do you see participants in PAR go into education? And how do you measure the impact on the communities the PAR participants serve or come from?
Um, so I think that this question is interesting because it depends. It really depends. So for like this PAR research project that we've done with youth transition and out of care, we the goal of the research wasn't for youth to go off into education. It was to give them unconditional cash support and to see that experience. Within PAR also, we welcome in all different educational experiences and backgrounds. So that could be someone who has a GED with no interest into going into like higher education. There are so many different pathways. So I do see what I really see with MPAR research is folks being activated to go into doing the work in whatever way they feel is the way for them. So for me, that is academically. For Denise, that is academically as well. But there are people who like are like, well, I'm gonna like go deeper into activism, or I'm gonna like make film, or I'm gonna engage my community in a different way. Like I'm going to go on the street and like pull people into whatever to hear their ideas and experiences. So it's really varied. And then what was the second part of the question?
Measuring impact. How are you able to measure the
I think
impact?
that I think the entire PAR process is about measure and impact. So even in thinking about like a survey design, right? Like we want to ask questions that haven't been asked already, or we want to be intentional about why we're asking them. So we include people who have those experiences that we're thinking about into this survey design process. Or even inviting folks in to do a group analysis who took part of that or who sat with us for survey building. I think the whole entire process of PAR is around like measure and impact and what to do next. The action is a really big part of it. It's not really about thinking about like, okay, like what are the research outcomes? We don't really set out to do the research with, we're trying to like learn these outcomes more so as we're trying to do these actions. And we need this research because these people love numbers and they love research. So here we're coming with our research, we're coming with our evidence, but also these are the demands, these are the actions. This is what we want, and this is what we need out of this research.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. A question here from Sandy Cruz to Rachel. How do you get youth not already engaged in activism through your program to understand that this is something that they should care about and do something about? What tools do you employ?
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit before, but just to elaborate, a lot of the times it's about like education and agitation. So a lot of students might be experiencing like broken escalators, or they might not be able to meet with professors and things like that on the CUNY end of things. And then helping them understand like that gap is due to lack of funding and not necessarily like the actual quality of CUNY. We have really like world-class professors. Really like I love all my professors. But at times they're working at multiple campuses. They're traveling across the city to like be able to pay their own bills. So they don't have the time to be there for longer than like their office hours, or they don't have the time to go above and beyond because they're working like just to make ends meet. And what we try to do when we're flyering, when we're having one-on-ones and teach-ins with students to make them understand like what the repair bill is, and give them those tools to work with, is understanding that like these problems are not unrelated. Like the same infrastructure problems that we have on campus are the same problems that you're having when it comes to making appointments with advisors, getting classes. A lot of times, like I've had it happen to me, it happens to a lot of students. A class will be dropped like the day of the semester because there's not enough enrollment and they can't afford to keep that class open. It's really unfortunate because I was gonna take 20th century African American art, and I was so excited to take that course, only for it to be dropped because of that lack of interest. But there were 11 people in the to take the class, and the minimum is 13. So like those little things like that, people don't realize that they're all connected. And when we're basically meeting with students and like we're meeting them where they are, it's like, what are things that are wrong in your day-to-day life that are like, what is wrong? And then pointing them to the solutions and giving them the resources to understand how to help themselves, and then also build momentum within the campaign and build like a mass movement.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you. We have another question here for LaTroya and the PAR from Desiree Obando. The question is, do you believe the resources, the benefits available for youth transitioning out of foster care reinforce those, quote, model citizens recipient tropes that existed in the early days of social benefits in New York?
I see Denise came off mute. Do you want to take the first stab at it and then I can jump in?
You can go ahead and I can piggyback.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Where did it go?
Uh-oh. It was just taken out of the Q&A chat. Let me see if there's if it's in there. Hold on. Here we go. Yes. Do you believe the resources and benefits available for youth transitioning out of foster care reinforces those, quote, model citizens slash recipient tropes that existed in the early days of social benefits in New York?
Yes, I do. So yes, so in general, the foster care system disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities. And because of that, there is a lot of disparities in the services that youth are receiving when they are transitioning out of foster care. So I do think that this is a group who slips under through the cracks as far as like what services the city is supposed to give to them to be able to support them. And then when we think about this demographic of young people, the city, the state, the government is responsible for them, right? To an extent, they are their caretakers. So they should be the ones that are ensuring that they are transitioning into education if that's a goal for them, or if they are learning a trade, if that's a different goal for them, that they have safe and secure, affordable housing. That is also a thing. But it's not happening. So I think across our research that we collected, like we were seeing throughout all phases of surveys, focus groups, interviews, like everything, that is not the case, and that all of the young people, even in our small 100, were not fully receiving some of the services. So yes, they are not fitting into the model citizen demographic, so they are not receiving the services that they should be receiving.
Right. And overall, from what we have seen in the past years and what we have witnessed and learned about the experiences of the participants who have been part of our research, is that yes, these resources are supposed to be available. They're supposed to be receiving a lot of different things provided by the city, by the state, by the government. But at the end of the day, they are not receiving these resources. They aren't being made aware of them, or they aren't they have to go through these long processes, jump through hoops to be able to get what they are supposed to be getting anyways. And a lot of times they don't, and then they end up struggling financially, emotionally, physically, because they aren't receiving these resources. And a lot of people are surprised by that. We've met with a lot of different people in a lot of different offices, and they are continuously surprised and shocked that, these things are happening. But at the end of the day, it is happening, and not a lot of action is being taken from what I have seen to fix these issues and to make sure that the youth who are supposed to be receiving these resources get it. So that's a lot of what we advocate for and what we do research on and what we have seen, and a lot of things that we bring up in conversations with each other, with the participants, and with people who can actually do something to fix this.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I was sitting here like, yes, that has happened. It's kind of like a form of gaslighting, right? Where it's like we already know that they're not receiving the support that they need. And then here's all this data that's showing that they're not receiving the support that they need, but it is mandated by the city to give it, right? So they have to receive these reports. So when we're in these meetings, they're like, oh wow, really? This should not be. But it is. So
And you know it.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you for that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I understand. People know these things when they're going to act surprised when there's a hearing or something. It's like, you know this. This is not new news to you. So yes. There's a question for actually the whole panel, but the first person named in this question, first person named the question for is Abube. Are there programs in New York City that teach, support, and empower the youth adult partnership?
I think that's a great question. I would say, not to my knowledge, no. I'm mostly aware of, like, when it comes to like teaching, like, and then supporting and empowering the whole program, no. I know independent contractors who like do this and go into places to teach that concept of youth adult partnership, including myself. Like, it's something that I've lived through and I understand fully. But then there are a lot of programs out there who are who are practicing the other way, the adult youth partnership. Like, the adult comes first, and then the adult says something, and the young person has to follow, and then we go into that list. So the other way, the youth adult partnership, a program, not really. But I will say the youth agenda, NYC Youth Agenda does practice this model. And then we have an event coming up at the Winter Dataland where, at the end of this month, on the 30th of January, where we're going to have young people who are, leading the event and supporting and presenting research to other young people with the support of adult allies. So we personally practice this model, and it's something that I'm very proud of because it gives young people a platform to express themselves and have a voice in the issues going on civically in society. I also know Tarsha put in another question. If, like, reaching out to nonprofits and city funded nonprofits, I will say the NYC Youth Agenda is a coalition of nonprofits. We work with Intergenerational Change Initiative, Office of Neighborhood Safety, YVO, Citizens Committee for Children, Working the Gap, and the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's Youth Committee on Mental Health. So these are our main partners in this in the youth agenda in this year. And so we are formed, and we are a coalition of nonprofits that are going and working on this together.
Thank you. So that question was for the panel as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to tap into that, Emmanuel or LaTroya, Sebastian, Rachel.
I think that is growing. So, like Emmanuel stated, sorry, not Emmanuel, Abube, sorry, is stating there are few far in between, like the ones on this call, the ones we are in coalition with on the youth agenda. There are some that we are like partnered with, like the Circle Keepers. I'm happy to see a lot who are taking that initiative and creating a more youth adult partnership model, but I do feel like there's a lot of work a lot of work to go, and a lot more could be doing that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Tasha, I see your hand, but we're actually not going to, I see your question in there. If you can just put your question in the chat, I'll ask that, excuse me. And I see you ask, do you reach out to nonprofits or city-funded nonprofits that focus on youth and community development to support your cause? And I imagine that can be applied to all three different areas. So let's start. Rachel and Sebastian, do you all reach out to other entities that are not students on campus?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I wouldn't say specifically nonprofits, but one of the main things we first started doing was specifically talking to community-based organizations, right? Especially in areas like Harlem, right? Where a lot of movement is currently happening around organizing regarding Colombia's displacement. But, in the last few months or so, we've also been talking to a lot of, I guess, other like partnerships and like organizers and organizations that like might either help, for example, fund some of the I guess, activities that we want to engage students in, or more specifically, like focusing on having a lot of, I guess, like coalition building, right? Because a lot of organizations, as I mentioned, are kind of working towards the same thing, right? Maybe not necessarily um, a specific focus on higher education, right? But the way in which, there are inequities between, for example, native Harlem residents and then the institutions that displace them. And so making sure that we like have those coalitions is very important for us, because we also want to like make sure that, students are engaging with the local community and listening to the demands as well, while actually often overlapping with the very same people who are attending CUNY being affected in a lot of different spheres of influence, et cetera. And I think it just like helps almost simplify a lot of the power mapping that we're trying to do, especially engaging with these universities, because we tend to find that the people who are impacted by, I guess, CUNY being underfunded is similar to the same people who are being gentrified, to the people who um, are seeing, I guess, like lower standards of living in their communities. And that like, that genuinely does make a difference. And also just even reaching out to recently like high schoolers and seeing how we can get them involved in the organizing as they're planning to go into university, whether NYU or CUNY or Columbia. That's all been a big step that we've been trying to do in transitioning towards more, I guess, community oriented organizing as well.
Thank you. I don't know if you had anything to add, Rachel. No? Okay. Thank you. So I'll kick that over to LaTroya and Denise, if you guys want to.
Yeah, we have reached out to nonprofits and organizations around the city to kind of tell them about our work, invite them to um I feel like let me backtrack. A majority of the time that we reached out to them was when we were recruiting youth for the pilot, and that is a big part of what we were doing, a large part of who we reached out to, get this information about the pilot and the application out to the youth transitioning out of foster care. And in present time, when we reach out to them, it's reaching out to provide to provide resources, to find out if they can be a resource to the youth, and just to send out like our report or stuff like that, or ask them to join us in like advocacy days or things of the sort, rallies, stuff like that, that we participate in. And yeah, I'm not sure if LaTroy, you want to add anything.
Well, that was pretty good. I think the only thing to add is that we'll probably be reaching out to more orgs moving forward as we um develop the next phases of our advocacy work after the research. So getting folks on board to help support us in passing this bill in New York State for youth to get unconditional cash support.
Mhm. Thank you. Emmanuel and Abube. Can we start with you, Emmanuel?
Sure. And may you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question is, do you reach out to other nonprofit organizations to engage to help move some of your work forward?
Oh,
That's
yeah,
that's me
absolutely.
paraphrasing, by the way. That wasn't the exact question, but that was me paraphrasing
Yeah,
because it's no longer in my face. Go ahead.
yeah. No, absolutely. I think Abube just mentioned like our Winter Data Land, which will actually be next week, Thursday. And a lot of that involves asking other organizations, people of the local communities. I just reached out to like my previous teachers and classmates to speak up and just join this event, and share what they have to learn. Um, share what they have experienced and learn what they can learn. But also that means like when we're doing these events, that means follow-up events. We have a couple of follow-up meetings with some of the people in Public Advocate Jumani Williams' office, as well as the Comptroller Brad Lander's office. We also are always looking out for other nonprofits who also do share the same um, values and ideas as us, to kind of get their insight to see what is the progress that they have been making, and the challenges that they have been facing.
Mhm.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emmanuel, as well. Yeah, we definitely have, like I mentioned earlier, some of our core partners that we have going into 2025, and those are the nonprofits that I mentioned before. But we also just have support in the community. There are various organizations that we partner with and we do events with and support our work. And I know Tasha put in the chat when we were talking about like ONS, and Tasha was pointing out that Office of Neighborhood Safety is a part of DYCD. Yes, it is very much a part of DYCD because we also have DYCD's Youth Council. My brother Sister Keeper's Youth Council as one of our members, and who has been one of our members in the former years of shaping up the youth agenda. So that's that connection with ONS as well. And then, yeah, so we have that, and those are our partners that shape up like the core of what we do as a youth agenda. And also, I'm also like we also have individuals who are on in the youth agenda who are like who have different roles. Like Latoya was saying earlier, I have my hands in different places. I'm doing different things. So I myself, I'm also the youth engagement officer on the DYCD Youth Board. So having that connection as well, also like we bring that into the work that we do with the youth agenda. I think Latoya wanted to say something, but. First.
Yes, it's the last week to RSVP. Answer in the chat. So we are looking for youth 18 to 25 for this day to land, but all are welcome. But we really want young people there.
Wonderful. Well, you're actually pivoting to my last question for you all as we close out. Can you just share some closing remarks, but also action items that you want folks to be able to take to help support the work that you're currently doing? So it's actually 3 parts. And how can people continue to stay updated on you and your work beyond this conversation? All right, closing remarks, action items. How can people stay connected with you all? All right, can we start with Rachel? Can we start with you?
Okay, yeah. So, closing remarks. We really just gave like a brief overview of all the work that we're doing, especially targeting these two like large property owners. But across the board, like this is a fight for higher education, social mobility, and equal access across work classes, demographics, neighborhoods. Um, and one thing that I can ask all of you to do is you can sign our petition that is essentially asking for this bill, the repair bill, to be moved up through the New York State legislation and put on to the upcoming election. And then also, Erin is adding them into the chat, but we also have our social media pages that are completely run by current NYU, Columbia, and CUNY students that you can follow on like TikTok, Instagram, that's there. And I'll also get the link for our petition there. But in general, this evening has been wonderful. And it's really refreshing to see so many different like youth leadership and opportunities for growth for students and ensuring that we all can have the opportunities. Oh, yes, our petition is right there. But yeah, thank you so much. I don't know, Seb, if you have anything else to add.
I guess just one final remark is, like our week of action is our like main week of action, and we're gonna be doing rallies across like different campuses, like teaching stuff like that is gonna be at the first week of February. And so, just making sure to get like, especially if you want to start being involved, like, attend one of the actions, like come out and like show support, like follow us as Rachel mentioned on like socials and stuff like that. You'll see more of my, wonderful face as well on a couple of those. And so thank you again, everybody, for speaking. I've learned especially a lot from the other panelists as well, and I'm wishing best of luck of everybody, both in their projects as well as future work. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Can we go to Emmanuel and Ebube, please?
I would just like to thank everyone. Thank you for, taking the time out on your, Wednesday evening. Like we really could be doing anything, listening to music, dancing or something. And you guys are instead sitting here, and listening to us speak about like what we're passionate about. So I would first and foremost like to thank everyone, to listening to us and staying engaged with us. I think the second thing is that I really enjoyed hearing everybody else's passions, things that they have been working towards. They're all very interesting and unique, and I'm actually interested in learning more about them. The third thing is that, I do want to say that 2025, we always say new year, new us. And especially with the new administration, I think that kind of propels us to focus more on like the things that we're struggling, the things that, we definitely want to change. And so taking the time and energy to make sure that, if you want to, push for half fare metro cards for young people, or, make sure that the local kids in your neighborhood don't go hungry, or if there's green spaces that are available and you can see that they can be put to use, make sure that you can reach out to your elected officials, and people in your community. Band together, because community is something that will be very much needed in these next 4 years. And I think I'll pass it off to Abube for where you can find us and contact us, because he is, in charge of all that stuff. And it sounds better from him.
Appreciate you, Emmanuel. Thank you all. Just like Emmanuel said, thank you so much for having us and having the NYC Youth Agenda here this evening. I'm gonna put our information in the chat. Our Instagram is the NYC Youth Agenda, and you could, if you have contact source, you could email us at nycyoutagenda@gmail.com. But yes, keep supporting our work. If you have contact with city government, you could definitely reach out to us in our email so we could set up this meetings and keep pushing some of our recommendations in order to make New York City a more equitable city for young people in all aspects. But yeah, thank you so much for having us, and hopefully see some of you and your young people at Winter Dataland. I'm going to put a flyer again in the chat. But yes, such a great evening. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful. LaTroya, can we hear from you? Then we'll close out with Denise.
I thought this was an amazing panel. I'm always happy to be in conversations like this, so it was a good way to end a Wednesday, Emmanuel. It's reactivating. I think come to Winter Dataland. And as far as Youth Empower, we're gonna have materials for y'all that we're gonna share out via email. We also only touched upon a small chunk of what we have done and what it is. So read our report, go through our website, and our material that we will send to just familiarize yourself with it. And if you feel like you want to contribute or join our next phases of activism or help us push our policy in any type of way, reach out to us. Denise?
Yes. So I saw in the chat that there was a question about what short-term goals we have set for Youth Empower this new year, and I feel like it's definitely we're focused on, releasing our research and getting publishings out and just really putting in the work to turn a pilot like ours into policy. And yeah, I would just say if you liked what you heard today and what you learned about us today and everyone else on this panel, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I loved being here. Just go into the chat, follow all of us, keep up with all of the work that we're doing, because all of the work that we're doing is important. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for being here, listening to us. I know a lot of people are joining after work, after school, after classes and stuff. So just a big thank you, and just keep up with us. We're doing a lot of important work. And yeah, thank you.
Mhm. Well, let me personally thank you all. And I'm going to ask the audience to join me in thanking our guests tonight: Rachel Parsley, Denise O'Connor, Emmanuel Anand Jr., LaTroya Lovell, Ebube Wema, Sebastian Leon Martinez. Thank you all for spending your hump day with us. You all definitely could have been doing other things, but you decided to be here with us and share your wisdom, your knowledge, your creativity, and we thank you for that. A few other thank yous. Big thank you to our interpreters, y'all. They've been holding it down. They've been keeping up even as I was talking quickly, and I know I should have been slowing down. Thank you so much to our interpreters. We truly appreciate you. Thank you to the CUNY SPS staff that labors behind the scenes every year. Nobody gets a chance to see them, but big thank you to Joya. Big thank you to Molly, to Chinera, to Dr. Sarah Zella Berkman. And thank you to you all, the audience, for being here, for engaging with us as we prepare to meet this year and the rest of this administration with information, with inspiration, and with commitment. I'll say this in closing, we have our work cut out for us. However, I am 100% clear that we will be victorious. I'm 100% clear that we will come out on the other side of this stronger, more connected, because what we see cannot stand. What we see will eventually eat itself, right? And so we understand that we actually have an opportunity here to show not only the rest of the world what exists here, but begin to create something different. And I'm truly grateful to the young people who are creating this as we speak. You are creating alternatives to what this nation is showing us it truly is about. And so I'm thankful to all of you, thankful to all of the participants for joining us. And you should be receiving an email after this with links, so how you can connect with everybody that's been on the panel, some of their initiatives. And we ask that you put in the work, y'all. Do what you can, do it, and we will see y'all next year.